Hey guys, what's up? This is FalseBulls123 and I'm back on my channel. Now, I know y'all have been waiting about a month before I've added any content, and I know it was a little mean of me to take a break right after I declared, the start of my rebranding. But it was a nice time. I had a lot of time to relax, and I probably should have used the time more to read, but I was dealing with a lot of other stuff. If you guys don't know, Oregon is in its second lockdown, and I've just been adjusting emotionally and financially and time management wise to those changes. So I've been kind of in a reading slump the last couple of months, and I'm trying not to kick myself over it because one of the things I'm trying to do is gain perspective on how I kind of address hobbies, address things like my production schedule, and approach it in a healthy, holistic way. And I realized that one of the things I was doing with my reading was that I was trying to read all of these great, insightful, impactful books. And yeah, I want to read great, insightful, impactful books, but I kept putting these brag expectations on myself, and I kept being angry at myself for not reaching them. And so I want to read books like that. I want to read new debut novels and ones that are fantastic, but I want to approach it in a way that I actually gain satisfaction from it instead of something that I feel like I should be doing for whatever extrinsic reason. Basically, I'm trying to find the motivation by doing something because I want to do it rather than that I think I should do it, if that makes sense. So, mostly this month and last month was just me reading books that I thought were interesting, that were a lot more lighter so that I could actually kind of relive the enjoyment of reading. Another big thing with my reading schedule is that usually I like to read at the beginning of the day, like during my commute to listen to an audiobook, and while I'm waiting for work, because I like to work a little bit early just in case. I usually read a little bit then, and lately I don't have that commute time to read, and so reading's been a lot slower, and I really need to address more adding reading into my schedule in more different parts of the day. But you didn't get on here to talk about my reading schedule. You got on here to listen to what books we have for the wrap-up. Okay. So, I've only read about 8 books over the last 2 months, so that was a book a week, which, is not the best in terms of book reading, but I enjoyed myself, and I actually liked a lot of the books that I read. So, let's actually get into it and shut up. First up was More Tales for the Midnight Hour. This is by J.B. Stamper, and it is just a short middle grade collection of horror stories. This is probably one of the earliest horror anthologies I received as a child, and looking back on it, there was actually quite a few stories that I remembered from when I was a kid and really loved reading again. Ones of note, Right In, which is this hilarious story of this really anal retentive man who accidentally stays at a horror-themed inn. And The Collector, which is about a boy who collects butterflies and then gets murdered by butterflies. That's all I'm going to tell you about that. So, since I came back home, I've had a chance to look through a lot of my old books on my bookshelves, and it's really nice to actually read something from when I was younger, your middle grade, your young adult, because not only do you kind of get to see it from a new, more mature perspective, but you also got to kind of see the origins of how your taste developed. And I think that was really nice because I still think that J.B. Stamper is a solid horror writer. I liked her stuff, and it was just a nice, kind of casual, spoopy read that wasn't too intense. Because I feel a lot of times with horror, we expect to be horrified. We expect to just not want to sleep at night because you are scared shitless. And one of the nice things about horror is that it is a spectrum, like any other genre, of how intensely you're going to feel the emotions advertised to you. And so by being able to read middle grade horror, you still get that horror vibe, you get those horrific tropes, but it's done in a much more lighter way. I also like reading, more indie, more less mainstream authors like Arlstein, because it's a lot less campy while still maintaining its middle grade horror aesthetic. Because I love Goosebumps, I like a lot of the other series that Allston has done, but if I'm being honest, Goosebumps is a very campy, light horror series, and by able to read things like J.B. Stamper or the Chiller series or any of the other middle grade horror that I have on my shelf, you get a very different opinion on what middle grade horror can aspire to be. Next up, we're going to get into another childhood favorite, because I mostly read children's books and then a classic, and that was pretty much my reading for the last couple months, and that is Teach Us, Amelia Bedelia. If you don't know, Amelia Bedelia by Peggy Parish is this book series about a maid who's really into homophones, which are words that are spelled different but sound the same. And so the entirety of the book series is a lot of really ridiculous, very humorous word plays. For instance, on the back of it, she's calling roll call, which, if I'm not sure that's an Americanism, but that's basically where you call to make sure everyone is in the classroom after the bell rings. And she's doing that by calling an actual roll, which is a type of bread. I don't know if that's Americanism either, because I'm not sure, like, if the dialect affects the jokes, you know? But basically, in this one, Amelia Bedelia accidentally becomes a substitute teacher because the American school system is just whack, and it was definitely whack in the 70s. And so we just have a fun time where she literally takes them out of the classroom, brings them to her house, and makes candied apples. Which, if this was in real life, would get her arrested and all the children would be traumatized. Not because Amelia was doing anything wrong, but just because we have very strict rules now about unaccompanied children. Anyway, this was a really fun time. It was a cute children's book. I'm going to re-gift this to my cousin on Christmas because he will love this because it is an absolute children's classic. Moving on, we're getting to my weeb phase of my life, because apparently this is just me slowly aging up for the age categories. And this is probably, I would say, kind of my high school weeb phase, and that is the first volume of Inuyasha. This is the only volume of Inuyasha I own, because I bought this at a thrift store for, $2. That's not bad. I really should stop keeping stickers on things that I've bought, but whatever. So if you don't know, Inuyasha by Rumiko Takahashi is a very sort of classic 80s manga and anime series. Do not watch the American dub because it is shit and I hate it. You can, it's just shit and I hate it. But anyway, so basically Inuyasha is the story of a girl named Kagome who is the granddaughter of this Shinto priest family, and she lives in a literal temple. Anyway, what happens is that she falls down a well, Alice in Wonderland style, and she wakes up in feudal Japan, and after some rigmarole with arrows and demon crows and like a super hot half dog, half demon dude, she basically has to go and get the magic MacGuffin called the Shikang Jewel, which basically gives demons Super Saiyan power. That was a horrible description, but it is very accurate. And so basically it's one part like funny rom-comedy, and one part visceral dark fantasy. So, one thing I really love about Inuyasha as compared to our other series, Ramno 1/2, is just its use of dark fantasy and horror elements in the series, because you get these comedic, fun, slapstick bits from the characters, but then you also have situations where you have these intense, horrific demons and monsters that they have to fight. And so, if you're really into manga, Inuyasha is probably just one of those classics up there that you read as a kid, along with things like Bleach or Junji Ito, and it just has so many great elements to it. The one downside to the series I will mention is that they never kiss in this freaking book. There is a straight up ship, and they never kiss, and I read all 50 novels. I know how this series ends, and I was disappointed. That's why Ramno 1/2 is my favorite series for this author. But moving on to my least favorite series from another mangaka, and that is Bisco Hatori. If you recognize that name, it's probably because, like me and every other teenager who was a weeb in the early 2000s, you're obsessed with the anime or in high school host club. Kiss, kiss, fall in love. Maybe you're my love. That's right, bitch. I'm one of those weebs. Now, if you don't know, Bisco Hatori actually wrote a manga series before Ouran High School Host Club called Millennium Snow, which, for some reason, I own every one except for the third novel, which kind of sucks because that's the best novel, in my opinion, in the series. But pretty much what Millennium Snow is about is that you have this girl who has a heart condition because, Weirdly enough, that's a revolving trope in anime land, just girls with bad hearts and emo-ness, who basically wants to see the snowfall every year of her life because she's probably not going to live that long, and it's kind of sad. Interestingly enough, she meets a vampire, and who's basically a giant tsundere, and she decides that she's going to seduce him so that she can live forever. But it's totally not like that, even though it's a little bit like that. And she also develops a really terrible love triangle between her and a werewolf. So this is basically anime Twilight. You know, I'm not half wrong. And so there's a lot of things I don't love about this series. At the beginning of the story, Toya, the vampire, is just a giant asshole. Oh, I'm sorry, tsundere, but let's be honest, he's just an asshole. And I don't really care for him that much. Honestly, another thing I don't like is because of the character's sort of backstories, if he doesn't, marry her or date her or whatever the analogy is in this story, she will die. And that's kind of a big barrel to put your characters over with the setup. Also, you just don't really see that good of a love triangle happening between the two. And if I'm being honest, near the end of the story, there's a twist antagonist that just was really there to be this emotional narrative parallelism that was not that intense for me. I'm sorry. I don't hate Millennium Snow because I feel like it really does develop into a decent story by the end of it. And there are some really interesting ideas in the series itself. But at the same time, it's just very much Bisco Hatori's juvenile work. And I think it's done a lot. I think a lot of the tropes she uses is done a lot better in Ouran High School Host Club, which still has these ridiculous, sometimes assholey characters, or characters who just do not understand the meaning of the concept no. Which, that's kind of a revolving issue, is just kind of overpowering you're my property style, male antagonist in this story, where I'm just like, hey, Chiyuki is a grown-ass woman. If she doesn't want to fuck you, she's already told you no. Maybe you need to leave, okay? Maybe, Chiyuki should get, a sword or something, because there is way too many simps over her. So, that was me rereading a series I wasn't really that into, but it was manga, so I read it anyway, because I have a problem. And if I actually remember correctly, I'm pretty sure this is my mom's, so she needs to take those back. So, the next book I have up is another picture book. You're wondering why am I reading so many picture books this year? It's just because I've been organizing my bookshelf, and I've been picking up these kind of weird old books from my childhood, and I'm going to be regifting them for Christmas. So I decided, this book is 15 pages, let's just read it and maybe not at all, maybe just a little bit hyperinflate my TBR. The book I read was Sweet Pickles, specifically Elephant Eats the Prophets. Now, if you don't know what Sweet Pickles is, basically it's just an old-timey book series about a bunch of alliterative animals who all live in a town together, and they do things based off of their one-dimensional personalities. This is a children's book, so it's not like we're in it for decharacterization. We're in it for zany hijinks and colorful pictures. And you know what? I can stand that. Unfortunately, Elephant Eats the Prophets is a very disturbing book. It's about an elephant who, true to stereotypical character, has binging issues. And instead of her friends coming to her and saying, Elephant, we love you, but this has become a serious risk not only to your health, which is never mentioned how much this overeating actually affects elephants' health, but also to your business, since you are literally eating the entire profits of your store, which, mind you, is the only supermarket in town. So, really, if we put that into perspective, one person is consuming enough product of their own product that they buy for their business, which is shoddy businessship. Do not take from your own stash, honestly, to literally negate the monthly consumption levels of 25 other patrons. That's ridiculous. How much is Elephant eating for that to be so fiscally irresponsible that she's about to go out of business because she can't stop eating? And her friends are like, you know what? We're not going to, talk to you about your eating habits or suggest that you get therapy or talk to a doctor about why you feel compelled to eat so much. We're not going to ask you to see a doctor to see if maybe there's a medical issue that is causing you to overeat, or be emotionally supportive as you try to find other outlets for your stress or to find enjoyment. No, you know what they do? They're like, hey guys, we need to band together and enable Elephant to eat so much by overspending at her supermarket. And you know what? That's nice that they were there to help a friend, but it doesn't solve the root issue of Elephant's binge eating. And honestly, what's going to happen next month when she's still in the same situation because the problem hasn't been solved and she's still in a destructive mindset? They don't address this in the book. And I'm not saying you can't enjoy binge eating. I'm saying you shouldn't be able to do it in excess, especially when it is causing you to fail your livelihood and put your entire community at risk for your fiscal and business negligence. It's just, Elephant, get some help. It's not okay, honey, but we love you, okay? I'm going to put this down because this is getting me worked up. So on that note, like I said, I was going through my bookshelf, and I also got a couple books that I'm going to unhaul this month. So I thought I would just throw that in there. Say it right in German, Guten Tag, Molik auf Wiedersehen, because this actually never really helped me learn German. The Spiderwick Chronicles, Notebook for Fantastic Observations. I've never really cared for tie-in books, especially these kind of fun and games tie-in books for fantasy series. So even though it has a bunch of beautiful, pictures and some little bonus content, I'm going to give it away because I'm not even sure if I own any of the Spiderwick novels anymore. And lastly, the complete book of Bible trivia. I got this from a birthday party when I was 12 and much more religious. And honestly, I don't really imagine a situation where I'm going to be absolutely endowed with biblical trivia. So all of these are going to be going in my unhaul pile, and let's get back to the content. So, the last physical book I read this month was The October Country by Ray Bradbary. Now, I love Ray Bradbary. I've mentioned it before. He's one of my favorite science fiction writers. And so when I saw this in the thrift store, I was like, ooh, gotta get it. So The October Country is a collection of 19 short stories by Ray Bradbary, all of them with a somewhat macabre or spooky theme. Now, Ray Bradbary is not known for his horror or thriller style short stories. He's mostly known for his science fiction, but he has written many different short stories over the span of his very long career. I think he wrote for maybe 50 or 60 years. It was a pretty long time. And so a majority of these were written in his earlier days before he became famous for science fiction, and many of his short stories were published in short story magazines, which were popular in the 60s and 70s. Now, two things of note is that 15 of these stories were published in his first story collection, The Dark Carnival, which was actually a very limited print. It's probably one of the most rarest books that he had out there, even though there was a reprint in the 80s. And the rest of them were printed in various other publications, and a few of these, I believe, have been reprinted in different collections. Most of his collections have some reprint in it because he has many popular stories. Now, I could get into the absolute shit talking about Ray Bradbury's dry but imaginative style, his use of imagery, his use of word choice, the way that he writes these very interesting, deep characters, but that would go on forever because I like to ramble, and I thought of a much funner way to introduce you to this anthology. And so what I did was I made a little bit of flash fiction to summarize every single one of these short stories in this book. So, the rules of this for this little game that I made for it was it had to be 10 words or less. So, please enjoy. Connie woman fetishizes little person, buys mirror. Woman has a nervous breakdown in Mexico on honeymoon, becomes mummy. Milk toast everyman attracts bohemians, amputates to become avant-garde. That's a skeleton inside of you. Local hick asks, what's in the jar? Answer, community. My body lies over the lake. I'm old, she's dead. Invalid boy has dog brings seasons. Also dead school mom. Person of interest insurance salesman says Karens have death wishes. Murder baby. or angry baby murder parents? Rubbernecker conspiracy theory. The Village, Cold War edition.
Seasons don't fear the reaper.
Of the Wheat. Winged man teaches offspring how to fly a kite. The Wind's a slasher because he knew too much. Obnoxious tyke murders vampire for breaking colored window. Non-binary awful. I'm a bad bitch, you can't kill me, says spinster. Rainy days, gothic romance, I'll float with my love. Adopted human, monster family reunion. Uncle Einar cameos. The best revenge is a life well lived. So the last book that I read during this period was Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. So the main premise of the world of Brave New World is that they live in a far future where the population limit is completely stabilized. Mouthy is who? Nah, bitch, we fixed that. And so people live in a high consumption, extremely limited caste system, where not only are people limited in their job options by what station they're born into, they have physical imperfections based on what caste they are in, which I thought was actually really interesting. Everything is so tightly controlled from the moment of your birth, literally, that the birthing process is probably one of the biggest industries and the biggest government function of the world. You literally spend the first, I think, 2 to 3 chapters of this book discussing literally how babies are born into this brave new world. Essentially, where the book takes a turning point is when one of the characters, Bernard, who is slightly ostracized in the world because basically he just doesn't want to be friends with people and he's antisocial, and people don't like that because that is illegal and wrong, and you're a horrible, blasphemous fiend if you don't want to be friends and have constant orgies with people. How dare he? But basically what he does is he goes to the Savage Retreat. So there's some situations that definitely have some icky racial subtext in it. Like a situation where people from a predominantly white country go to a savage reservation, which is predominantly Hispanic and indigenous people, and literally bring back a intelligent savage who just so happens to be white, or at least implied. So that's, like, always a great little Pocahontas moment that we love to see in fiction. And this next part does have some sexual assault trigger warnings, just to let you know. There's also a situation where they're watching a play, and this interracial couple are having a nice little time until the black man literally gets struck by lightning, goes crazy, kidnaps and rapes the woman, is then lynched by 4 white, Adonis men, and then the woman proceeds to have an orgy with her white saviors. And that just has no racial subtext at all. At all. Nothing there. Nope. That's definitely not just a complete usage of the black super predator myth. And so, while I can't say that the book is inherently racist or explicitly racist, like things like, Lovecraft, it does have that subtext where you feel there's definitely a bias going on. And just reading things like that really put a bad taste in my mouth. Another big issue I had with the book was this really egregious example of slut-shaming, which I thought was so over the top. So, a little bit of context for the book. In this Brave New World society, everyone is polyamorous. I do not believe they are polygamists, mostly because there doesn't seem to be any sort of long-lasting relationships in society. The main motto of this world is everyone belongs to everyone else, and so things like family or just long-lasting relationships are not really a societal thing. It is part of the propaganda, it is part of the belief system of the world, and so everyone is literally just hooking up all the time. Their religion is literally just having an orgy while doing dinner theaters, so that should put some context to it. On the opposite end of the spectrum, in the Savage Reservation, which still, can we come up with a better name than that, Huxley? It is, I know it was 1930, but I don't think it would have been okay back then either. It probably would have been, that's the sad thing. But basically in there, it is very strictly monogamous, very traditional, like our current world. And so, on one hand, I can understand how John Savage would feel very beholden to monogamy, especially since he was quite often ostracized due to his mother's hoeing. And that was kind of a big thing, is that how much he was mistreated in that society because he was an outsider, and he was an outsider to it, and also his mother just refused to really assimilate or acclimate to those societal standards, causing him to be an outcast. So at the same time, you have this polyamorous society, and you have John Savage, who is a very strict monogamist growing up in that culture. So what happens, he basically falls in love with one of the female characters. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but magic of editing. And they eventually get to the scene where he's like, hey baby, I love you, and I'm going to quote Romeo and Juliet at you, because the only book I've ever read is literally a collection of Shakespeare. And that never got obnoxious at all. I'll tell you that. I love when people just obnoxiously quote Shakespeare all the time for any situation. That's my favorite thing in books, actually. I'm being sarcastic. And she's just like, that's great. So, societal standard, we get a bang now. That's awesome. Here's my titties. And he looks at her, and he's like,
I love you.
I love you.
And so he is just going at her, and he's just like, you egregious trollop, you strumpet. Get away from me, ho, with your slatternly ways. And she was just like, I do not understand what this fuss is, but I'm leaving because you do not talk to me like that. And honestly, honey, yes. Do not let a man disrespect you like that just because he has issues with his sexuality. That is all I am saying. And essentially after that, he leaves society and then starts a riot. And the rest of the book is interesting and weird. And that's all I'm going to say. The parts I did like about the book, because most of them speaking in the negative from here, is essentially it had really great world building and had a lot of really interesting philosophical discussions of what creates a dystopian or utopian, depending on your perspective, and what has to be lost for that to be created. Obviously, dystopian novels, everything's always a trade-off. Yeah, 99.99% of people are happy, but what are they losing to become happy? You know? Anyway. And so there's a lot of interesting pieces of that. Unfortunately, the slut-shaminess, the racial subtext that I did not appreciate, all of that really brought down the book. So, was it well written? Was it interesting and insightful? Did it really predict hookup culture and late-stage capitalism? Yes. Is it also kind of grimy and gross, like, anything you ever read about H.P. Lovecraft? Also yes. So, I'm going to give it 3 stars. I know I haven't read any of these other books, but I just wanted to give you like a strict opinion of how I felt about Brave New World. Anyway guys, that's all the books that I read for the last couple months. I'm going to be doing another wrap up beginning of January, and I'm going to be posting a few more book videos during the month of December. Not quite sure if those are going to come out weekly, but I'm going to try my best. It just depends. Also, remember you can like, comment, subscribe. I know everyone says that, but it really does help me grow my channel. I want to hear from you guys. I want to hear your thoughts and opinions, and if you disagree with me, I definitely want to hear that. Let's start a flame war. So, that's going to be about it. Just remember, wash your hands, tell your loved ones you love them, and live every day trying to be a better person. This False Bulls 1, 2, 3, and you guessed it, I'm signing off.